Hello, and good to see you all again. So I'm going to be talking now about airline ticketing fraud and how this relates to cybercrime. Now, it does feel a little bit weird talking about this during a pandemic when most of us can't travel. However, airlines are, at the moment going to be suffering huge amounts of financial losses, and if they are then going to be hit with further fraud when they're going to be reopening, then this is going to be quite devastating for them. There's quite a lot of importance as to why we should be looking at airline fraud, even when at the moment there's going to be not as much taking place. So a little bit about myself. I'm a university lecturer at the Department of Computer Science and Technology at the University of Cambridge, and I'm also Deputy Director of the Cambridge Cybercrime Centre. So airline ticketing fraud is actually an issue that's been going on for quite a few years now, but it wasn't something that was really understood before my research took place. So a lot of people were seeing airline ticketing fraud from different perspectives, but didn't have a great overview of what it looked like. So this is an example of some policing activity that's been taking place. Europol has been running global airline action days, and over time there's been a gradual increase in the number of suspicious transactions that they have found. This is with, they've only been really looking at transactions using compromised credit cards, and also, this is also corresponding with an increase in the number of airports that are taking place and countries. And we can see there that there's been a rather steady amount for the people detained. So over 7 years, there's been 10 global airline action days, and they've identified over 2,500 tickets that have been obtained fraudulently, and they've detained almost 1,300 people. Now, these are kind of very limited days that might only run for a couple of days per year. And so there's actually a lot more taking place than is being picked up and represented in these numbers. So I became aware of airline ticketing fraud after one of my colleagues found advertisements on online black markets for very cheap airline tickets. And we were kind of wondering how this was being orchestrated. And so this is what led to the research project. So one of the things I did was I went and interviewed people from law enforcement, from banks, from airlines, from the travel industry, and also intelligence officers in order to identify what this fraud was all about. The other thing I did was analyse advertisements on the Alpha Bay market. Now, this at the time was the market that was most active in allowing the trade of fraudulently obtained airline tickets. So this is what's called a crypto market. It's since been taken down by law enforcement, but it was predominantly a drug marketplace, but there was other things being traded on there as well. And what I found was that this is really like a blind men and elephant problem. So if you ask a group of blind men to describe an elephant, what they describe is going to be based on what they can, what's salient to them. So it might be the tusks or the ears or the trunk or the tail or the legs or the body. But actually seeing the overall elephant can be quite a challenge. And this is where I try to fill in the gaps. So one of the things I looked at was who's actually travelling on these tickets, and I found there's basically two types of travellers. There's complicit travellers who are aware that the ticket has been obtained fraudulently, and they are sometimes travelling in order to carry out other types of offences. And there's also victim travellers, and they're usually unaware of the fraudulent nature of the ticket. Now, I should just make it clear here, the tickets that have been travelling on are genuine, real tickets. It's how they've been obtained that's fraudulent, and I'll take you through some of the methods and explain why we would see people who are travelling those tickets not being aware of the fraudulent nature. Now, one of the really interesting things was I had kind of assumed when I started looking at this research that people travelling on these tickets who knew that they were fraudulent would not be using their own identification. That just seemed like a crazy thing to do. However, I did not find that was the case. Most people will actually travel on their own passport. One of the reasons for this is that if you are a complicit traveller and you do get picked up by law enforcement, they realise that the ticket's fraudulent and they detain you, you will probably claim that you are a victim traveller, that you are unaware of the fraudulent nature of the ticket. This makes it a real challenge for law enforcement to take any further action. And if you're travelling on a fake identification, then it's not going to lead any credence to a claim that you had no idea about it being anything other than a genuine ticket. Now, I also looked at links to other crime types. So what other kind of wrongdoings were people who were travelling these tickets engaged in. So one of the, I think for me, the most devastating part of this was that some of the people travelling on these tickets were actually being smuggled or trafficked. And this included, for trafficking purposes, the sex trafficking. So there's a young woman being transported from known destinations to other known destinations, and it's believed that the purpose of this is actually for sex trafficking. And there's also other trafficking and smuggling purposes as well. Another purpose is theft. So this could include theft from duty-free stores within airports. So there's rings of people who will travel from airport to airport to steal, and then they'll have drop-offs and continue travelling. And also pickpocketing, as well as travelling not only in airports but travelling to cities that surround airports and stealing there, and then getting onto the next plane to go to the next destination. So you're not known within the area as picking pockets. So there's also some smuggling taking part, such as cash and contraband like drugs and tobacco. Interesting enough, the tickets were also being used to facilitate money laundering. So it's there's awareness of people, money mules being transported on these tickets in order to go to other countries and open up bank accounts, and then this would then be used to launder money associated with other types of crime. Also credit card fraud, so using compromised credit cards in other locations, or also going and installing skimmers to compromise further cards. So that was just kind of an overview of some of the main criminal reasons why these cards are being used. Now, the next thing was looking at how travellers obtain tickets. Now, this is different from how tickets are obtained, and we'll get onto that a little bit later. But those that are travelling on the tickets, how do they actually come in possession of them? So one of the ways is through the online black markets. As I said, this is how I became aware of the tickets being traded. And if you're obtaining a ticket from an online black market, you probably would be pretty aware that there's something fraudulent and dodgy happening. So these markets are typically hosted as hidden services on anonymity networks. And in order to generate trust, to have people willing to trust people who are engaged in untrustworthy things, they have a lot of kind of buyer feedback. You can pay through an escrow service or direct to the seller. There's advertisements, and a lot of these accept alternative currencies such as cryptocurrencies. So this is an example advertisement from Alpha Bay. It says, "We're a team of professionals in the travel industry who have been in business for over 2 years with resellers all over the globe. Great and affordable experiences with worldwide flights and hotels at 25% of retail value. Our customers' safety and satisfaction is a #1 priority." I would just like to show you my cat who's come to say hello. There's no legal risks involved. Our services are not carded, which means they're claiming that they're not credit card fraud. How to book with us? Booking requests must be done with 72 hours in advance. First, capture a screenshot of the trip that you want from any agency. Upload it to an image upload site. Then provide the passenger details as follows. First name Donald, last name Trump, date of birth, 1st of November 1955. Now obviously the traveller will provide their own details. As soon as the order is done, and we will provide you booking details, flights and confirmation vouchers for hotels. That's just it. Confirm it with the airline website or call hotel and you're ready to go. So this is a kind of a typical advertisement for the type of trade. And here we see a screenshot of another one. Again, it says go to another website to choose the itinerary, take a screenshot of it, post it, and so forth. So here we can see that the starting price is 29 Australian dollars. It ships to and from worldwide, and they accept escrow. And there's some information about the feedback that has been received by the vendor. And now the next way that you might obtain a ticket is through fake travel agencies. And this is where we see unsuspecting buyers being tricked into becoming victim travellers. So if you're looking to maybe go on a holiday or a work trip and you're looking for a travel agency to book that travel for you, you might go and do a search online, or you might come across an advertisement. So the fake travel agencies will advertise through maybe social networking sites, through search results, from search engines or websites. They might place advertisements in newspapers and classifieds. Some have been known to advertise on the radio and also through posters displayed at airports. So you get your next ticket cheaper through us kind of thing. So they can be quite ingenious. And this is an example of advertising through search engines. So one of the airlines employees that I spoke to said that many of the airlines, including themselves, have experiences where these companies are paying for ad space on Google. So when you do a search for the airline, their paid ad comes up before their website comes up, their genuine website. Their phone numbers are the first things that people see, so the customer calls these phone numbers, but they're not us, they're not booking with us. Another way that you might end up in possession of a fraudulently obtained ticket is through insiders. So insiders are those who are already working in legitimate travel agencies and airlines, and the fraud is carried out by an employee of a legitimate provider. So an example of this, one of the travel industry employees told me they get rogue employees on the side taking in cash from customers and then inserting compromised cards to pay for the ticket, and that is always a concern for them. So these are the types of ways that you might see a victim traveller come in possession of a fraudulently obtained ticket. The next method is through word of mouth, and this can happen on a wide spectrum from very trusted, close-knit communities and informal networks providing access to tickets, or can be very opportunistic through people that you have no real prior connection to through chance meetings. An example of the latter is, example of the first one is there's tickets sold in communities. For example, some passengers that have been interviewed have said they get the tickets through their church. But on the other end of the spectrum, one of the analysts told me that during the last Airline Action Day, somebody had purchased a ticket at a hot dog stand. He said, I was talking about my travels, and the guy who was selling the hot dogs said, I have extra tickets, just provide me with $600 and I can get you tickets from point A to point B. And the individual person, when he was interviewed, said, I provided cash to the vendor. Why would this be fraudulent? Okay, so there's some of the ways that tickets can become in the possession of the travellers. But how are the tickets actually obtained from the airlines and travel agencies? So this is a different part of the equation here. So one of the most popular, most seen method is compromised credit cards. And this is actually the method that law enforcement are looking at for the Global Airline Action Days. So this is the travellers that they detain through those action days will usually be travelling on a card that's been obtained, on a ticket that's been obtained through a compromised credit card. Now, credit cards can be compromised through a variety of ways. These include things like data breaches, skimmers, malware, phishing, or through employees already working in the financial, retail, or service industries who might come across cards and be able to obtain the details. And the cards are traded on the same kinds of black markets that we see airline tickets also being made available. Compromised credit cards are the most versatile method, but also the most obvious, and therefore the most likely to be detected and cancelled. So this is why we saw before one of the advertisements saying that they're not carded, because people might be reluctant to obtain a ticket that they know has been carded, because it might be more likely that that will be cancelled before they can travel. So as a result, we have actually seen people obtaining tickets actually changing and displacing to new methods, to new ways of obtaining tickets. This includes things like loyalty point fraud. So you might know this as reward points or frequent flyer points or miles. And there's differing rules depending on the scheme about the movement of points, but many can actually be used to book a ticket in a name other than the account holder or with a different airline. And it's believed that the compromise is when the fraud takes place with loyalty point fraud, that this is due to sharing email and password combinations with another unrelated breached account, but there's automated testing and checking of those credentials against a whole lot of websites to see if they match any other accounts, and these websites include airlines, and so the airlines will see this kind of automated checking at their end. So here's an example from the airline perspective. So predominantly what they see is account takeover. When somebody has obtained the login credentials of a member, they get into their account, and from our technology, we see it as a valid entry into the account because they have the right password. And then while they're in the account, they will change the email and in some cases also the physical address and phone number on the account, and they will start to redeem the points and deplete the account. And this is also an example we see airway accounts being advertised for sale on places like Belfort Bay. Here we see prices from 59 Australian dollars selling British Airway accounts. This says here, hacked British Airways accounts for tens of thousands of Avios points on them. Become a travel vendor and a travel agent and make huge money with these accounts. Another method is gaining unauthorized access to global distribution systems. Now, global distribution systems, or GDSs, are what travel agencies use to book tickets with airlines, and some of the most well-known ones are Amadeus, Sabre, and Travelboard. Now, there was actually a group of people operating for 6 years that were based on the Ivory Coast, and they were phishing travel agencies in order to obtain their credentials, access to the GDSs. So once they obtain these credentials, they were then booking tickets, and then the travel agency is invoiced for the travel by the airline about a month or so later. There have been a number of arrests, and this group has been disrupted. However, there is indications that the use of this method is ongoing. And we also see, again on the black markets, access to the GDSs being offered for sale. So one example here says, soon we'll have hacked Amadeus logins, but we'll list this when ready. Somebody asks, can you elaborate how you're going to use them? And the response is to book tickets. Another method is through the use of compromised business accounts. So much legitimate travel is for business purposes, and depending on the setup within an organisation, how this is actually arranged might be through corporate accounts with travel agencies. You might have a relationship with a travel agency that only deals with business clients, or some companies have their own internal travel agencies, particularly large ones that do a lot of movement back and forth. So here the attacker has really had two options. They can compromise the corporation, or they can compromise the travel agency. One way of doing this is through what's called business email compromise. So one of the travel industry employees told us what they see. They have the corporate booking scheme. It says there's various types, but one is a fraudster will pose as a corporate client. They'll do the research on the internet, find the names of managers and executives at international companies, and sometimes they'll even create an email domain that's very similar to the true corporate email domain, but it's under the control of the fraudster. And they start emailing back and forth, and if the travel vendor doesn't realize that the email domain is a little bit different, they'll then issue tickets against the corporate account. Another option is to compromise with corporate booking tools. So as explained here, a lot of corporations have corporate booking tools. They can go on and arrange their travel. Unfortunately, the fraudsters love to get access to these corporate booking tools as well. They know just how to manipulate them, and they will go in and start issuing tickets one after the other. And if nobody is watching the travel vendor, these guys can do dozens and dozens of tickets before anyone realizes what's going on. One thing that we see less often is identity fraud. So this is when somebody may open a credit account in a fake or a victim's name. Now, there are some advantages of identity fraud in this area. One of these is that there's no chargeback. So if it's credit card fraud and the genuine cardholder realizes that this was not a transaction they made, they can ring up the bank and have that transaction reversed. And that doesn't necessarily happen for identity fraud unless the bank itself realizes. But there are also disadvantages that means that it's seen less often. So this includes requiring a level of information that's actually hard to obtain and to use. So banks have a lot of checks in place to try and crack down on identity fraud. If they are successful and are able to open an account, usually new account holders don't get a particularly high credit limit. You have to have a kind of trusted relationship with the bank to be able to increase that. And also newly created cards that are used for suspicious transactions tend to be blocked very quickly. So airline tickets are actually perceived by banks to be suspicious, and so this might have more scrutiny than other types of transactions. That being said, they are still identified occasionally from the banks that I spoke to. Now, the other method that's probably seen a bit more than identity fraud is voucher fraud. So this includes things like gift vouchers. If somebody that you know is an avid traveller and you're not sure what to get them for a birthday or Christmas, one option might be a travel gift voucher, but also vouchers are used by airlines to compensate travellers when something has gone wrong, say a flight has been delayed. And this means it's a type of internal currency, and all currencies are subject or likely to end up being defrauded. So again, there's a number of ways why vouchers may end up on the being used. So you might have rogue employees who either issue vouchers when no negative experience has been occurred. So they might enter into the system that there's been some disruption to a customer and issue vouchers. Of course, the customer doesn't receive it, but they can then use that themselves. And the other way is through not providing the voucher to the intended recipient. So there perhaps is a disruption, but the customer does not receive the compensation that they were entitled to. And again, we do see travel gift vouchers offered for sale on the black market. So the next thing is policing. So this seems like an interesting fraud. There's links to other crime types. You would think this would be very much on the police radar. And in fact, Europol has been taking the lead on this issue, and they've been coordinating the Global Airline Action Days that I talked to you about before since 2013. And this is run with local law enforcement, airlines, as well as financial institutions. And we have seen over time an increased number of jurisdictions that have been involved and are helping police, helping Europol with their local police to detain those, but they're really only looking at those who are travelling on compromised credit cards, because that's what they're looking for with financial institutions. There are huge numbers of problems with law enforcement in this space. So you might see, I've noticed before in the graph I showed you, they had a number of people detained, not the number of people, say, arrested or prosecuted. And This is because actually quite a few of these end up going through the criminal justice system. So some of the challenges for law enforcement are that there's low dollar amounts or one-off purchases, and this is something that they note in the forum, saying it doesn't matter if this gets detected, police won't take any action. And also the inability, kind of related to this, the inability to attribute purchases to the same buyers or see purchases across a large number of travel agencies and airlines. So it might be each individual transaction is for a low dollar amount, but if you were able to aggregate that across all the different transactions that were taking place, it would perhaps add up to quite a large amount. But being able to link this for law enforcement can be quite difficult. Added to this, fraud is often not seen as a priority for law enforcement, particularly when there's really complex international aspects as there are with airline ticketing fraud. These complex international aspects often means that there's a lack of international contacts, and even if an airline did know which police to call in a certain country, who would be aware of airline ticketing fraud, they'll then face the challenge of having different time zones, different languages, which also complicates matters. So we often see that cases are not local. So for example, an international traveller might be arriving on an airline from a different country, and the affected financial institution may also be overseas. They also might just be transiting through a country where the local police are, and so this further complicates matters. There's also local jurisdictional issues. So for example, the police in the airports may not necessarily have any authority to take action on fraud matters. There can be a lack of awareness on travel fraud, so there's not aware of the different ways that it takes place. And as I've demonstrated, this can actually be quite difficult to understand, particularly then knowing if the person who's travelling is actually a complicit traveller, or are they really a victim, in which case they shouldn't be prosecuted. And this can also be complicated when the person travelling is not in physical possession of the card that's being used to make the transaction, if it's a compromised credit card. So I would like to thank my research funders for this. So it was funded by the US Department of Homeland Security as well as the UK Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. However, the opinions, findings and conclusions are those of myself and not the above mentioned agencies. I've had a couple of papers that have arisen from this research. So Leaving on a Jet Plane, the Trading Fraudulently Obtained Airline Tickets provides an overview of the how the fraud takes place. And then the second paper really looks at the policing and black market aspects of this. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at the Cambridge Cybercrime Centre, who are always a source of inspiration, and some of them will also be talking at this event. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact with me. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for listening to my talk.